Cool. So thank you so much for the warm welcome. Thank you for being here at 9 a.m. after what sounded like a late night last night. So super appreciate the time and super appreciate getting the invite to be here today. AIIDE's, I said last night, AIIDE's got a special place in my heart, and it's got a special place in the kind of broader AI and games community. So this is a real great opportunity to be here and talk to you all. And we kind of started out, being in a corporate kind of research environment is interesting. But it does mean that a lot of what we work on, a lot of the really cool stuff that we do, we don't necessarily get to come and talk about. So when we come and do a presentation like this, it is a little bit kind of like trying to figure out what we think we can bring as added value to the community. So that's what we want to talk about today, is kind of like, what happens after you've had a good idea. So as Matthew just said, I'm head of AI for Take-Two Interactive. I was head of AI for Zynga for 6 years. A lot of people have forgotten that Zynga got acquired by Take-Two, but that did happen. So I haven't really changed jobs. I just got sucked into a different part of the company. And that's been what's happening for the last year-ish. I've been doing this AI stuff now for about 20 years, which is a scary thing to say out loud. And my PhD is in AI for games, but it was done at a time when you didn't really get to say that too loud. So officially, it's simulated virtual environments, because that's how you got to do games back then. I also have done a lot of industry engagement, even when I kind of was in my PhD program and wasn't necessarily having the best time ever. So I became the first director for the International Game Developers Association from outside of North America in 2013. Now, that organization's been around for quite a while. So that's an interesting definition of international that they had for a bit. That meant very much US and occasionally Canada. But now it's a lot more international. It's a lot more inclusive of kind of global voices. As part of that, I ended up moving over to the AIIDE Foundation, which I know some of you are aware of as an organization. So I headed up the organization from 14 through to 21, led about a 600x growth of that group, and made sure that a lot of kind of marginalized and underrepresented folks could get their start in the games industry through programs that brought people to GDC, to E3, to a whole bunch of different venues, and kind of gave them a push into the industry and a bit of a launch. So that's the stuff that I've been kind of doing. That's a bit of context on where all this is coming from. But what is Take-Two AI? So when we set up back at Zynga in 2019, there were 3 of us. We sat literally in the basement. We got off of everybody's radar, and we were a skunkworks group, and we were doing like wild stuff. And in fact, Nadine's going to touch on that because I think she was the 4th person to join that team. We're pushing up towards 30, and we're a group of engineers, researchers, product managers, producers, or project managers, depending on how games industry you're feeling on the day, data scientists, and some analysts. And our remit is kind of building next-gen tools and tech, and we support teams kind of across the enterprise, really. Like we cover game teams, we cover some of our studio operations, we cover our marketing teams. We're touching a lot of the business, and we're touching areas of the business that you wouldn't necessarily think would be involved. So we are a game AI team that also dabbles in enterprises, is kind of the way to think about it. But you might have noticed that the conversation around AI has changed in the last couple of years and got weird. And suddenly we got a whole bunch of highly enthusiastic people doing things that maybe were a little bit medium sketchy. And as a result, the executive team at Zynga sort of went, oh, hang on. Don't we have like a bunch of basement gremlins who know about AI stuff? And suddenly we were driving governance for Gen AI for all of Zynga as on top of all of the research and kind of more traditional AI work. So effectively, any AI tool that was being used at Zynga had to go through our team for approval. And now that we've transitioned to Take-Two, that is also true across the enterprise. So basically, any team anywhere in Take-Two reads a TechCrunch article, and that turns into tickets for us to deal with, which is a lot of fun. But I think, it is important work. It's important that, somebody is kind of being some level of checks and balances against the stuff that's out there, because we can all admit that some of what's happening right now, not necessarily the best. So, at times it feels like King Canute sat on the beach trying to stem the tide. And at times, there are important battles that we actually need to kind of make the argument for, to kind of educate the folks internally about, why things might not necessarily be the best. And, as subject matter experts, that's something that we are uniquely qualified to do. And everybody in this room is kind of uniquely qualified to use that expertise to kind of have some amount of impact for good. So I do have to post a bit of a disclaimer. Take-Two is an interesting corporate structure. We do provide a lot of autonomy to our labels, and they kind of run the show. I mean, they're building the products, they're building games, they're owning the creative decisions that are getting made, and they're making the money. So we do allow them, or I don't know if allow is necessarily the right word. They get to operate as independent entities, and that means that in the context of a presentation like this, I do have to say out loud that we don't speak for 2K Games, we don't speak for Rockstar. Do not ask us anything about Grand Theft Auto, because we probably don't know. As we've transitioned into Take-Two, we are increasingly speaking for Zynga less on this topic. There's an asterisk there because a lot of our kind of historical case studies and a lot of the stuff that Nadine's going to present about is Zynga work. So we are going to be talking about Zynga to some extent, but we don't necessarily speak for Zynga management. We don't necessarily represent policies there, even though we're going to show you a few or mention some of the work that we've been doing with them. So this is a slide that you've probably seen ad nauseum over the last since AIIDE started. And this is something that kind of is a recurring theme. We sit in these rooms and we talk about cool research and cool opportunities and cool things, novel techniques that we're working on. And then we kind of look at video games and go, well, why? Why can't you just do the thing we were talking about last year? This is not a new conversation. It's a slightly different conversation these days. 10 or 15 years ago, this was probably a lot more combative and confrontational, and there was a much starker industry versus academia divide. It felt a little bit more us versus them, and that was very weird for me as I transitioned from being an us to a them. But the thing that we want to talk about today is some of the why behind that. And we've talked previously about performance and the extent to which putting things into a game context requires understanding that all of your compute is going to go on rendering the scene. You're not going to get that much bandwidth to do some cool AI thing on the side. That's one aspect, and it's the one that I know I've talked about probably in this room, or not specifically this room, but conceptually this room. But there's also quite a bit more to it, and there's a lot more going on here than kind of you might otherwise think. And kind of one of the things that has been the journey for me over the last 10 years, kind of in industry and kind of growing through that, is working out how to get things adopted. So let's talk about ChatGPT. I could sit here and rant about ChatGPT for the rest of the hour. Not going to do that. But it's notable that ChatGPT kind of exploded in 2022. GPT-3 wasn't that much of a big step on GPT-1, GPT-2. Transformers, the paper came out in 2017. What happened in that 5 years? Why did this thing kind of languish in a paper, in academic corners, and then suddenly become a thing? It's an interesting thing to kind of think about, because at the end of the day, that's what's happening, certainly happened to my research, where I thought it was really cool, and even I've not adopted it. But we create these artifacts, we create these papers, and then a lot of the time, and I no disrespect to anybody, but they stay in academia, they don't go anywhere. And if you're really lucky, you might get a bunch of citations and it might turn into something that builds and builds and builds. but like it doesn't become that breakthrough thing. And there's probably a lot of things that deserve to, that don't get to. And that's really interesting, right? It's unfortunate, but it's unfortunately interesting. When you think about what happened with ChatGPT, transformers coming out in 17, they weren't usable. They weren't a thing. What was the actual breakthrough in 2022? Slapping transformers into a chat interface. That's what OpenAI did that changed the game. And like, they've built a $1 trillion company off of not necessarily being amazing research and doing something groundbreaking, but off of a UX change. That's interesting. That's useful information, right? That's signal for us. So it turns out that attention isn't all you need. You know, we see this stuff happening time and time again. You know, Left 4 Dead is another great example of a thing where like the Left 4 Dead AI director, I think I wrote one of the first teardowns of that system for AIGameDev.com, rest in peace. The underpinning system for the Left 4 Dead AI directory is what's called a hierarchical concurrent state machine, HCSM. That was developed by the University of Idaho as part of a driving simulator system. And it sat in academia until somebody went, actually, we will pull that over and suddenly directors are this big thing that's kind of, everybody's kind of talking about, everybody's kind of wanting to play with. But the underpinning technology, nothing to do with that. That's kind of wild. So what we want to do today is really dig deeper on kind of those themes and those topics about like, what does it take to actually take the good idea, take the algorithm, and kind of turn it into something that people can use. So I am just the executive for the group these days. I write decks, I have meetings, I don't get to do cool stuff. That's unfortunate. It makes me very sad most days. With that said, I mean, it means that I get to hold space for the people to do the good work. And I'm really, really excited today to introduce one of those people. Nadine Perez has been with us since 2020. She's a senior engineering manager with the group. She's one of the rising stars of this group. She's learned how to take cool stuff that I used to come up with. Now we've got Rob Zubek, who spoke last year. You know, we've got Kristen up at the back, having great ideas, a whole team of AI folks having great ideas. Nadine's one of the people who says, okay, cool, that's interesting. Let's figure out how to make it actually work for real people. So I'm really, really glad that Nadine's here making a conference debut. So please welcome Nadine.
Not quite as loud as Luke, but can people hear me if I don't use the mic? You feeling good? Cool. Yeah, so thank you so much. I've made a career out of following Luke in meetings, fortunately. And as you know, both Matthew and Luke kind of mentioned, I'm a senior engineering manager on the Take-Two AI team, where I've had the pleasure of working with people like Kristen and Kayla and Sam up here in the front. You might have noticed from the beautifully designed AIIDE program that there is not a doctor in front of my name. I do not come from a research background or an academic background. But luckily today I'm not here to present research. I'm kind of here to talk about my sort of industry role in taking some really fantastic ideas that kind of come out of places like AIIDE and, like Luke said, turn them into products and bring them into sort of an enterprise environment. Something I do have in common with some of the people in this room is I am a game developer. I've spent the entirety of my career in just kind of like large-scale industry game development. I have had sort of like the privilege and the opportunity to develop and release across a variety of sort of like platforms and technologies. But I really found my professional expertise and professional passion in mobile. Which is where I joined the AI team. Before joining the AI team, I kind of hopped around to different teams as a game developer, and I really fell in love with the sort of like focus on speed and iteration that you find in mobile. Instead of spending years and years on a game and then putting it out to the wild and praying that people like it, Mobile really has this tight, intimate feedback loop with the player where you're constantly sort of talking to the player, you're doing these really consistent releases and consistently changing the game in really core ways. I was able to onboard onto teams all the time and have my changes that I made in code out to players in the first couple weeks of joining the team, which is like really fantastic and really sort of brought me to appreciate the meaning of impact on a team, which is really what I'm here to talk today about is impact. Like Luke said, I joined the AI team in 2020. They were actually in the basement. I had to move from like the nice, shiny fourth floor down to the basement next to the basketball court, which was very loud. But I joined that team to work on a game called Spell Forest. It was a really cute game. It was a casual word game that the team was developing to prove this over-the-air GDL system that really enabled these really hyper-individualized experiences and modifiable gameplay over the air for players, which was a technology that truly I wasn't really able to fully comprehend the complexity of at the time. I was brought on as the fourth employee along with my coworker Roman to be the game developer monkeys in a way. Luke had set up a lot of really great infrastructure, but we unfortunately had to tear some of it down and rebuild that. But what was really exciting was that I had acquired all these skills as a game developer really for the purposes of delivering on business outcomes. Even though I had been on different teams of different sizes and different stages of development, they all shared this sort of like similar motivation and similar goal. And this was the first team that was like really like researchers. And it was really a different culture and not just like kind of on the team and how people interacted with each other, but it really changed the motivation of what we were trying to do. And I loved my job. I loved being a game developer, but for the first time, this sounds kind of cheesy, and I know Luke is going to roll his eyes, but I felt this almost like sort of nobility sort of instilled in what we were doing because I was taking ideas of people so intelligent and that I respected so much, and I was building games to like deliver those ideas to players and to help kind of prove out those ideas for these people that I was working with. And Spell Forest was played by over 400,000 people, which means that 400,000 people got to test out this technology. We got to gather data on, and all because I was able to like make Rue do a little dancing animation. And that was so exciting. And I think it really, as an individual contributor on the team, that was so personally and professionally fulfilling. But as a leader and manager on the team, it's also been really incredible to work with people and create this shared goal of marrying impact and novelty, right? Delivering novelty and really interesting ideas and proving out hypotheses to players in ways that like not every team has the privilege of doing. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today, of how we do that on the team and how you can all do that as researchers, whether that's sort of moving into the industry or staying in your programs. Which brings me to, I want to kind of get ahead of it. Nadine, I want to be a professor. I don't care about industry games. Why should I care about this? And I think that when we're talking about impact really starts at the idea, right? Spell Forest was built as a pipeline to deliver an idea. And this is a room full of ideas, right? AIIDE is nothing if not a room full of like brilliant novel ideas that deserve, as Luke was saying, to be seen by the world. I also think we're at this really interesting moment in time where the people who have the most informed, nuanced, and principled takes on these really impactful technologies are not always the people who are given the skills or the tools to deliver that technology to the world. And so even if you never want to be in the industry, you have power over your research and the way that it's perceived and the way that you choose to talk about it, that you choose to develop it, and even like where you choose to take it, who you choose to kind of like open it to. And I think it's empowering to kind of understand an industry perspective of, there are industry people in this room, right? This is an academic conference, but we are all guests in your space, but we are here in this space. And I think that that's really important. And really what today is going to be talking about is not what to do instead of research, but really what happens after the research is done, right? What happens after we take the idea and we kind of throw it into the octagon and see if it can work. I had an interesting conversation the other night at dinner where we were kind of talking about how the role of a researcher is to, well, a huge role of a researcher is to kind of eliminate environmental and external variables to prove out the trueness of your idea. And that's so core to the process, and that is something that we do. But when we're thinking about turning things into a product, what we really have to do is bring all of those variables back in. So once we've created this really bulletproof core concept, to really bring it into the world, we have to prove and bulletproof it for the world. We are a research team, so we do this sort of research portion, and we've kind of gotten into like these cool grooves where we have researchers really focusing on doing that first part, and then they're able to hand it off to teams that I manage, where we're able to kind of like bring it into that production environment. But there are so many things that you have to do to kind of like protect those ideas when you're opening them up to the sort of scale that we are. You have to build a lot of infrastructure and scaffolding to make sure that as you're bringing these variables back into the product that holds this core idea, to make sure that they're not introducing friction to your player or to your user, and to make sure that you're able to still measure and kind of like successfully run, we don't call them experiments, but like experiments on the people that are using your tool. We have different challenges in product than we do in research. I think that a really nice way of phrasing it is like the research portion is you are testing your hypothesis. When you make it a product, your hypothesis is testing you and your ability to deal with network outages. I think like it speaks to the quality of the people we've been able to hire and bring on, but rarely is our negative user feedback, oh, the quality of this procedurally generated level wasn't like high enough. Usually the feedback is like, I can't connect to the app, or like our authentication service works differently and it's not as compatible with your tool as we would like it to be. And so we have all these sort of like, we're also part of a huge organization. I mean, Take-Two is a giant company, and we have reliance on teams. We don't own Take-Two networking or off teams or cloud infrastructure teams. So we have to really work with those teams to make sure that we are reducing roadblocks to people accessing the cool stuff. We have an entire infrastructure pod on the Take-Two AI team that largely deals with removing obstacles in this space, which really creates a lot of room for people to sit in their expertise in other spaces as well. Because when they get to sit in their expertise of these PCs, that means researchers get to kind of focus on the research. Another thing, this is an AI conference, we're an AI team. AI is computationally expensive. AI costs a lot of money to run, and not just in our AWS instances, but it also sort of costs in user experience. And something that we talk a lot about on the team is sort of the design and UX and the product considerations when it comes to having people interact with relatively new technologies. Everyone wants everything to be fast, and it can't always be fast. And we have to kind of think of creative design and product ways to allow people to use tools in a way that feels frictionless to them, but where we can still sort of do like the good work that we want to do on the back end. I've recently been in a lot of conversations over what's the threshold for how long we can realistically make someone wait in a website for results. It's a conversation we're continuing to have, and it's like, should we email them results? Should we set up some sort of like web notification system, or should we just put a little spinner bar and ask them to please not close the page? And those kinds of considerations, people will just not use your tool, right? You're not standing there, you're not showing them and explaining the cool tech. You're trying to integrate something interesting and novel into a workflow for the purposes of creating more productivity or an easier kind of or more interesting workflow for a team. So if you're not able to do that, they don't use the tech. And so it's really important that we're able to kind of like come at it from these technical perspectives and product perspectives and design perspectives as well. Another huge variable that you kind of bring back into the equation is people. People are not very predictable. They don't really always use your tools or your products in the way that you want them to necessarily, but the user is always right. And so we do a lot of work to kind of work across disciplines. We make, as Luke kind of said, we make tools for people across the game development lifecycle. So game developers and designers, but also people in marketing, people in HR. We're working with lots of different kinds of personas and being able to put ourselves in their shoes and sort of discern their specific requirements becomes really, really actually foundational to the work. Level designers are always using a really old version of Photoshop or Adobe After Effects for some reason. And having the expertise on the team where we've all worked with enough level designers to know that becomes really valuable. And to know that we need to ask those questions, right? Because again, at this sort of level, you're not able to ask everyone to upgrade. These are separate teams. These are users. These are people that you are sort of catering to, and you have to kind of work with where they're at. Speaking of users, we have a lot of users at Take-Two. Take-Two is a $44 billion company. I think that last $4 billion was when we joined. Not really, but maybe. And just internally to the company, we have between, I think it's like 13 or 15,000 employees. So even when we're kind of talking about just targeting internally within the company, it's a huge, kind of like a huge scale of users that we're working with. Something I think is so true about researchers, having now been to AIIDE twice, but also interviewing a lot of researchers and working with a lot of researchers, is that researchers are really Swiss Army knives. Y'all have done all of these sort of peripheral jobs so well to sort of like bring your ideas to places like this. You have all been sort of like producers and designers and writers and all of these different roles. What's really cool about being at scale is you have the resources at scale. So if we are being presented with 10,000 trees to chop down, we don't have to only use Swiss Army knives. We can invest in axes. And what that means is that researchers are kind of allowed to create space for their expertise and for their domain, while we have people who can focus on the design, who can focus on the writing, who can focus on decks, PMs, right? Or Luke now. And I think that it creates a really wonderful place to work when you kind of have this shared goal of marrying those two things, right? Of novelty and impact. As long as we're all moving in that same direction, everyone is kind of committed to making the same thing happen. We can all kind of sink our feet into what we're best at. I think another way that sort of manifests is in the legal and compliance and security policies at a place as large as Take-Two. We're dealing with so much IP and PII at this sort of like level that you have to have people like producers. The producers are the backbone of our team. you have to have someone who is constantly unblocking these external factors and these external variables when it comes to like lawyers and compliance officers, the cybersecurity guy who's emailing me all the time, so that people can really, really do the work. I think also something you get at scale is just sort of like geographic or demographically diverse issues. In our very, very early days, we had a tool that was so technically complex and interesting that we had built kind of for artists, designer types. And we built this tool and it worked fantastically. Everyone on the tool or everyone on the team really loved it, and we were testing it, and we thought we had built this really amazing sort of novel solution, but we didn't realize that we had built in the foundation the assumption that everyone would be able to reliably upload 70 gigabyte After Effects files over their internet. We did not think about residential ISPs and how people have different internet access than us. Often artists don't require the sort of like heavy duty internet access that maybe engineers do. And so kind of not thinking about scale in those really early days, that was the way that that manifested poorly. We still built something really cool. But if we had sort of thought about like those variables coming in and built it into the core of the tool, it might have been a little bit more successful. And I think that after you kind of bring all of these variables back into the equation and you've built something really cool, and let's say users are using it, users are loving it, the next thing you really have to do is learn how to measure like the success of your tool or the success of your product. Sorry, I'm using tool a lot because we work on a lot of tools, but it really goes for any product. I think that this is really where the differentiation between a smart idea and a smart solution comes into play. Again, this is a room full of smart ideas, but ideas really can't manifest into successful products unless they fit into an existing workflow, right? Unless they're part of a solution that someone is asking for, and you can convince someone to ask for it, but they, at the end of the day, have to ask for it. And when you're sort of building out like these shared goals and trying to prove this core idea that we're protecting at scale, this becomes really important because at the end of the day, we have to prove to the business our business impact and prove to ourselves that we did something cool to sustain our egos. And I think that a nice way of framing this is asking and answering the right questions, right? So you sort of have to ask 2 questions at least when building out products like this. You have to ask, how are we creating value for the team, for the business, for the user, or maybe even just for the field? Sometimes we are allowed to just kind of like do projects that we think will better the industry as a whole. But you also have to ask, like, what are we trying to prove? And marrying those things and making sure that those things are happening in tandem and making sure that the paths are shared, because you can't just have it all come together at the end. In a business context, you do have to kind of continuously prove that these things are harmonious is so important. I think that we've done a really excellent job at that, and I think that really starts with bringing in like great expertise. We have people on the team that can look around the company and identify issues where people are not seeing issues and identify them as opportunities for us to come in and do something kind of interesting. So the 2-dot scavenger hunt game, which is pictured up here, is sort of this like, where's Waldo? And level designers go in and they place hidden objects around, and the game is defined. It's pretty cute. I enjoyed playing it. It was a fun thing to play at. They were not complaining about doing this work, and we were not looking to replace the process of this work, but we thought it would be a really valuable way to answer a question of, oh, maybe we can use this as an opportunity to compare different PCG techniques. And maybe in doing that, we can address a really core issue in level design where level designers can't always like quantify or qualify what like a good level is. Maybe we can kind of like create a vocabulary around that. and kind of like give them 3 options and say, which of these are the best level? And then tell them what like a good level is based on like what they think and how they feel. I think that was like a really fantastic example of us going in and proving value at a sort of a business level that wasn't just about like moving the needle. It was actually about encouraging like the creativity of the people already doing the job. But also an opportunity for us to kind of do some fun stuff that people wanted to do. AdMaker, I think, was another good example of us seeing future value. We wanted to sort of prove out this GDL playable modular gaming system. We thought that a great business impact would be in playable ads. And so being able to kind of tie that to mobile ads, which are such like a financial backbone of the company, and use that as an opportunity to kind of experiment on GDL stuff, I think was a really great example of making sure that we are answering the right questions, and that starts with asking the right questions. Here are some of the ways that I think Take-Two AI has done it well. These are the products that Luke said I could talk about. I think we have some others that do it really well additionally, but these are just sort of examples of like when we've asked a question that puts us in a good position, right? And in order to sort of like be able to successfully measure success, you have to have a question that you can answer, right? We can just kind of go build something and be like, isn't this cool? But if we showed that we started with a really intentional question and that we answered that question in the way that we wanted, that is like the greatest metric of success, especially when you get people to sign off on the question when you start. And I think that another thing about measuring success that kind of differs from a research environment to an enterprise environment is this concept of staying correct. You can't just build things and put them out and call it a win. Even if your users love it on the first day, even if it has a great first week, you really have to build products as like feedback-driven architectures and pipelines. Your products really have to do the speaking for you. And you have to structure them in a way where you are measuring what matters, right? We've introduced all of these variables back into the product. We don't want to be measuring how people are interacting with the UX. That's not really what's interesting to us, right? We want to measure the business value, and we want to measure the things that we're interested in from a data perspective. So we've done a lot of work around creating like really granular and insightful data pipelines and libraries and structures to kind of support that across projects. You also have to be prepared that, our name has changed 3 times, I think, since I've joined the team. We have all these different logos. We've been part of different companies. You have to really be prepared for external factors to sort of like derail your solutions and still being able to measure success along that sort of timeline. And this is my favorite slide because I get to talk about engineering, but I think a great way to do that, and really a core concept to hold in your mind, is building really flexible systems. I think that when you are trying to measure things, especially when you are trying to prove out a really specific idea, right? If we have this research question and that is really what we are trying to prove works or makes a difference or moves the needle, we want to make sure that the systems around it are flexible enough that we don't have to change that idea in the light of external circumstances, right? We want that idea to kind of stay the same, to stay consistent as long as it works, and everything around it to kind of morph so that it can live wherever we need it to live. On Spellforce, we did that really literally with UI and gameplay systems. One of the first things I did on Spellforce was build our skin manager because we were delivering these customized over-the-air experiences. It meant every UI element, every font, every text, every image had to be dynamic. So we built managers that sort of had every UI element had to be instantiated within that manager with sort of a default asset that we could then cater per player to have a more interesting or more individualized experience. That required a lot of sort of upfront development time, but meant when the game went out to players, it was incredibly flexible by definition and kind of by design. That was what we were wanting to prove out. Something I'm less excited by is optimized and automated testing. I don't like writing unit tests, but as a team that really works with so many users, in like the sort of development process, being able to see if your changes are successful becomes infinitely more and more complicated when you have a lot of intertwined systems. And that makes it harder for developers to create stable and flexible things. So I did want to throw that up here because I do think it is very important. Another way we kind of get a lot of data insight and granularity into our systems is by having a lot of custom pipelines. So we have custom deployment pipelines, custom analytics and database structures and libraries that we've developed internally to really give us that like as low level as we can a look at like what is going on with our systems. How are people interacting? How is like the input of what people are giving us affecting like how the system is working with it? And we can do that as low a level as like our instance, going into the instance, opening up the files, which really I think shows how deeply rooted we are in this sort of like research idea of like ultimately we want to be able to open our laptop and see at the very, very base root, like what's going on. And it really does all just kind of come down to like measuring success through control, right? Through control of what you've put out, not only your idea, but also all of the infrastructure surrounding your idea. I would love to stand over the shoulder of every person who ever uses one of our tools. I would like to tell them exactly how to use it, what they're doing wrong, and why it's so cool, and why what Luke or Kristen or Kayla has built is so amazing. But Luke says that that's a waste of my time. And so you have to build systems that really listen for you. And I think that, you know, as you kind of go forward and build your own research projects, I think all of these things are good things to keep in mind. But also, if you're interested in internships, you can note down some keywords to mention during your interviews. And before I hand it back to Luke, I want to say that I am just so excited to be here for the second year. This is such an amazing like community. I learned so much. You are also all very like incredibly cool. I've had a lot of fun getting like dinners and lunch with you. And I hope that truly, if one thing I said in this presentation was helpful to anyone, I will have felt like I could at least give something back to this community, which our team has gotten so much out of. And with that, I'll kind of turn it back over to Luke.
So yeah, so just to kind of wrap up and echo some stuff, you know, at the end of the day, you know, like I said at the beginning, you know, we don't get to come and talk about crazy stuff we're doing internally. Sometimes we're not doing that much crazy internally, but sometimes we are. But equally, we're not here to tell you how to do research. We're not here to tell you like, here are the problems you should be solving. But we can give you a bit of a taste of what it is like to go beyond what, you know, when you've gotten to the end of the paper and then what happens next. So kind of just really getting down to your corporate takeaways. And a lot of these are just like direct quotes of things that Nadine said. You know, I think this thing about research being about isolating variables and then actually making things work in the real world being about having to reintroduce those variables. Like that is kind of the bottom line of what it's all about here. You know, this idea that like, yeah, okay, novelty is great. And we know this, right? We know that the latest and greatest of what we're talking about is better than what we were talking about 2 years ago. But what matters is the impact it has. we're still talking about fear 20 fucking years later, because that one had impact, not necessarily because GOPE is the best architecture. No offense, Jeff, if you see this. But the point being, and this is kind of where we started, where the talk title came from. An algorithm, a research methodology, that's just the start. It's what happens next that's what's important. So, thank you so much, all of you, for your time. We are going to be running internships. We usually, when we come to AIIDE, we've gotten our shit together. Not so much this year. So here is a link to a Google form where you can give us your email address if you're interested in internships or maybe full-time roles. Maybe just keep in touch. So basically, we're calling it internships. This is going to be our mailing list. Feel free to add your email addresses to it, and we will hassle you if you're interested in our stuff at a later date. Thank you so much, and I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. No. I mean, it's a great question, and I think it is an ongoing problem. One of the reasons that I crossed the fence, or one of the things that allowed me to cross the fence, I probably should say, is that I didn't have funding for my PhD. And that meant that I didn't have travel money to come to conferences like this. And it meant that there was no particular problem with me engaging with industry conferences instead. And it turns out industry conferences don't require you to write 8 pages that then get slated by some random person you never heard of because you didn't cite their work. You come along and you write 2 paragraphs and somebody in industry goes, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's talk about it. So like for me, my incentive structure was different, and that allowed for me to straddle the fence. So I don't have a guide to how to fix that because it was so busted that the fence was already kind of broken for me. But it's a problem, and it's probably something we should be working to address.
So if you look at I was wondering how have you had any experience like the breaking and parts? Not relevant, right? But obviously, right, the general visible or general side is not readily. Wondering how you get.
Yeah, I mean, Nadine can probably speak a little bit to the marketing side, which marketing artists are more capitalist-centric, let's say. I think one of the things with Take-Two is that it is it's such a large organization that the diversity of opinions is pretty significant. I have definitely, and I'm going to have to be real careful right now because we are recording this. I have been asked to go to a studio that I will not name to have kind of a conversation about internal conflict between the kind of AI boosters versus the AI detractors. And I think honestly, one of the things here more than anything is I'm a very good professional wet blanket, which kind of creates a world where like, I'm just like, guys, this isn't real. Like, you can do bits and pieces here, but like this stuff isn't coming for your job. As long as your manager knows that what your job actually is and can do, the Cory Doctorow line is the one that really is emblematic of the moment. AI is not coming for your job, but it is going to, AI is not going to do your job, but it is going to convince your manager that it can do your job. Which, is about where we're at right now. And, a lot of what we've done, and Nadine's been involved in some of this as well, is kind of educating and kind of raising the level of discourse such that people know that maybe this thing isn't going to be like, I press a button and my job gets done for me and I go and have a coffee for the rest of the day. However, what I will say is there's a staggering number of people who think that that's what their job should be. And they don't seem to get that if they can press a button and go and knock off for the rest of the day, their manager could press that button and they just go and be unemployed. And that's terrifying. There are so many people out there, and this is kind of worldwide, it's not specific to Take-Two, who don't seem to understand that they are kind of signing the first couple of paragraphs of their termination notice right now, if they kind of push it the way that they're trying to push it. It's very interesting to experience, and the only thing I've got in terms of navigating it is the dose of reality and the wet blanketism. Jim.
Do you have where there that makes it a little bit challenging, and they can take the different road. What do you do about the culture of education?
To that. I think a huge result is I have learned the names of a lot of people in this room well before coming to a space like this, right? There is this sort of like shared community, and it's a small community. And so you kind of learn the things that have like influenced all of these researchers and these academics, especially during this time. What I will say is something that is so important on our team is culture. It's something that Luke has really established, and I think the team has really brought forward. And there is zero pretension from anyone on our team, and there has never been pretension from anyone on our team in terms of degrees. And I think that when you have this sort of like shared goal, again, it just lets people do what they're at, and then everyone's happy, right? Like the researchers don't have to be PMs, so they're happy that they have PMs to do that work. And I think that that's kind of where that like harmonious happens, at least from my perspective, thinking it feels so. Maybe Luke doesn't like working with people without
No, I mean, it's interesting to bring that up here, because I can tell you specifically that the model that we've taken for culture is born specifically out of a lunch I had at Santa Cruz. And I think Kate was there, and it was just hanging out around a table, bouncing ideas backwards and forwards. And I was like, this is what I want. This is the space I want to build. And I've said previously, like, and I think I kind of alluded to it earlier, like, I did not have a good time with my PhD. It was bad, but I didn't know what else I could do. And I didn't know where I could drop out to. It felt to me at the time like it was like drop out and go work at McDonald's, or just stick through it and try and get to the other side. And one of the things that I've really tried to do with this team over the last 6 years is kind of build the space that I needed when I really did not want to stay in academia anymore and didn't know what to do instead. So we've stolen ideas from a whole bunch of y'all. Because just because I wasn't having a good time on that PhD program doesn't mean that there's no value in academia, but it means that it wasn't working for me. And that's allowed me to kind of try and take some of the good stuff from what I saw in academia and marry it with some of the stuff that, in a lot of very real ways, building this team has itself been experimentation and research and trying to figure out what works. And it's going to be as we continue to iterate over the next few years.
Great.
Thank you all.